As always, before we begin today's video, I'd like to verbally thank my patrons, especially those donating $10 or more monthly, such as Alex Vanderwood, Almost Dead Again, Anatoly Volnov, Andrew Melnick, Big Time Jim, Colin Gajic, Cooper Sutton, Corbet Godwin, Cosmo Borski, Daniel Christman, Darius Fazier, David Kaiser, Duncan Bristow, Fockhead, Fralem, Jack Eisenberg, Jano, John Strange, JP De La Torre, JW, Max Binning, Mixer Rolls, Money and Muses, CeeLo, Silver Silence, Vladimir's Noldholm, Wolf HD, and Young Master Pig. Due to some copyright stuff that I got into on a community post, I wasn't able to do the video I wanted to do this week. Now, I don't like to classify some videos as passion projects and others as not passion projects. That just doesn't line up with the way that I think about my channel, but I really wanted to do a video on Amused to Death by Roger Waters. However, my previous video on Fargo is still in a little bit of a copyright Bermudish triangle, so I can't really run the risk of doing another video on heavily copyright protected content such as Amused to Death. In a few weeks I'll be able to, but in the meantime, I'd just like to further reiterate my thanks to the patrons for giving me that extra bit of security that I need to do videos like the Fargo one or this Amused to Death one, where I'm not exactly sure where the ad revenue is going to go at the time of uploading. Thanks. This week, I spent an evening with what may very well be the most unique game I've ever played. Superliminal is what's simplest to call a non-Euclidean game. That is to say, light and geometry doesn't behave how they do in the real world. The main mechanic of the game is the ability to change an object's size in accordance with the forced perspective illusion. See, humans have two eyes, meaning that we have depth perception. What this means is that we can tell how far away and large an object is just by looking at it, without any other defining features. Cameras, however, usually don't have that accommodation. Since we're seeing a 2D image when we look at a picture, there's no way to determine the size or distance of something without the context of surrounding objects. This is used to great effect during the ending of 2001: A Space Odyssey. This second monolith could have been very close to the camera and tiny, or it could be far, far away and bigger than Jupiter. The use of forced perspective leaves this completely ambiguous. Well, that's how Superliminal works. The game lets you change the size of objects by moving them around the frame, and it pushes them to as large and as distant as they can be without being seen through other objects. If I move this object here and release, it's massive, but if I show that that object is in front of this near wall, it's released in a much smaller form. That's all well and good, and the game makes some pretty cool puzzles around it, but what really interested me in this game wasn't the puzzle design, the narrative, or the Talos Principle-esque philosophical musing. Instead, the game worked for me as a perfect example of what I think is the single coolest aspect of modern-day gaming. You can do just about anything in a video game. Yeah, I know that this statement needs some qualification, but it's kind of true. Sure, you need to allow the player to interface with the game, and you need whatever you're doing to be representable with just visuals, audio, and haptic feedback, but within those limitations, absolutely anything is possible. I'm not going to get into why I think games are the most artistically potent medium. I've basically been doing that since I started this channel, but I think that this is something worth exploring. In 2020, even relatively small indie developers can basically make a game look and play however they want. Now, budgets are still of course a restraint, but consider what the largest studio in the world could do 15 years ago, and then consider what a one-man team can do now. This is a game called Lost Soul Aside, being produced by a single person by the name of Yang Bing. At the time of this trailer, Lost Soul Aside had been in development for 2 years, and God of War 1 took 3 years to make. What I'm saying is that the sky is the limit in the modern world of gaming. As I was playing the final sections of Superliminal, my mind was just being blown around every corner. Every single room acted as some sort of crazy illusion. There was this checkerboard floor, and each of the squares acted as a hole. Without the context of seeing what's beneath or on top of the board, they could either be holes or not be holes. However, once I placed a chess piece over a square, it looked like the piece was sitting on it, so the square became solid. In this section, there was a doorway which opened up to a white wall. I, of course, couldn't pass through this wall, but as soon as I put this block over the wall, it looked like the block was on the other side of the door, and suddenly the door didn't look like it opened to a white wall, but to a white room. We've all seen the portal gun at work, we've all seen the Stanley Parable's paradoxical hallways, but this was something else entirely. In the real world, geometry is a static concept. What you see is what you get, literally. In this game, however, geometry is a completely abstract concept, and just a slight change in perspective can drastically impact the shape of an object. Only very particular examples in other media ever break away from this, and it usually isn't for more than a single shot in a film, or a single image on a canvas, or a random GIF of an illusion you can find online. In a video game, however, you can poke and prod at an illusion and watch it shift along with your perspective. In all of those other examples, real life included, every illusion is just two-dimensional. You can only look at the illusion from the angles you're given. In Superliminal, through the raw power of game technology, for the first time ever as far as I'm concerned, an illusion is something you can create, break, change, interact with, and that's simply because when you really get down to the nitty-gritty of things, these aren't illusions at all. Through the power of game technology, this is all real. Things are actually changing, and all the game is doing is using the power of illusions to hide those changes. I don't think that in my entire life, a piece of media has ever blown my mind in the same ways that Superliminal has. Sure, it's not the most artistically important game ever made or anything, it's not going to completely change the way I look at myself and the world as some games, films, and albums have, but I've never interacted with a piece of media that had my jaw hanging open for 30 minutes straight. I've never in my life had to ditch the same understanding of the world that I've been relying on since the first time I realized my parents' faces didn't actually cease to exist when playing peekaboo. But, well, in Superliminal, I had to ditch the very concept of object permanence. The game even ties itself together with a fun little message about seeing your problems from a different perspective, turning itself from a neat little tech demo puzzle game to something more meaningful. Film, literature, images, music, they've all got the power to move mountains. Games, on the other hand, they can rewrite the laws of physics.